Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3. Selling oneself is one of the simplest yet most misunderstood skills. Let's face it, stage fright surely sucks and can even be completely crippling. Needless to say, nobody wants to screw up in front of a crowd. We're going to learn to prepare powerful, impressive, thought-provoking presentations on this week's episode of FYI. Welcome to For Your Info.
Inglés.
You got it. Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of FYI. And today we have an extra special show because we've got a guest. And it's not just any guest, it's a guest I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And if you're not, well, you're going to be after today's show because you guys are going to follow her and you're going to subscribe to her podcast as well. Now, as I said, most of you are in the know, sabios, and you already are. But she's here to help us because this is a tough topic to tackle. Whoa, I didn't do that on purpose, the T alliteration. So I decided to enlist the help of a friend of mine, somebody I know who has experience with this, not just teaching English, but more specifically with presentations. Now, her name is Anna Connolly. She's a business English expert, a tutor, a teacher, a podcast creator, and she also co-hosts another podcast, which I wasn't familiar with. So I think it's better to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, as we say in English, desde la fuente, because that's the most reliable source. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our special guest, Anna with 2 N's.
Thank you so much, Alberto. What an introduction. I couldn't have asked for a more fantastic intro. And yes, Anna with 2 N's specifically. Well, I don't know what else to say. I'm from the UK. If you guys haven't already noticed from my accent, I grew up in the east of England. So if you're listening to me now and you're thinking, I don't know what accent she has, it's a southeast English accent. And as you said, Alberto, I'm a teacher, I'm a coach, and I really specialize in business English. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to have a bit of a chat about presentations and hopefully give you guys some ideas about some things that you can do to improve and some of the common things that people find really, really difficult.
Sure. Because presentations, I mean, when you hear it, you're like, oh, easy. But then, as I said in the intro, selling yourself, which is essentially what we're doing, aside from our product or whatever, sounds easy on paper, but you do it. I had a girlfriend who said, oh, you just sit on the radio and talk for 2 hours. And I said, go ahead. Do it. See how easy it is to because we're exposing ourselves as well, and nobody wants to be judged, but that's how we communicate. We have to get in front of a group. We have to sell our ideas and sell ourselves. And you help people with that, not just with a course, which we're going to tell people about, a special course that you have, but also on your social media and through your podcast. Tell us a little bit about that before we get started on today's topic.
Sure. So I have a podcast, which is called Anna with 2 N's English Podcast. And on this podcast, I do it every week. And each week, what I'm trying to do is give you exclusive tips, advice about how you can improve your speaking skills. That's what I'm really, really interested and focused on. I really want to help you be able to improve the way that you speak at work in English. So that's the focus of that, and I cover loads of different topics. And as you mentioned, Alberto, one of the things that I kept seeing all the time was that my students hated presentations. They actually hated it to the point where sometimes they would avoid coming to class just to avoid doing a presentation.
They would pull a sickie?
They would pull a sickie, a complete sickie. So, and I'd spoken to a lot of my students and I thought, do you know what? This is one really specific skill that I think is really worth practicing. And why? Because as you mentioned, presentations are really, really difficult to do. Much easier to say it than to do it. And we actually do presentations at really important parts of our lives. Think about it. A job interview, for example, presenting something in a meeting, maybe to directors or managers, or maybe giving a speech to people, trying to motivate them.
Or a speech at a wedding. It's somebody's
or at a wedding.
It's their most memorable day, and you don't want to screw it up.
Exactly. So presentations are actually used at really important parts of our lives. So I really think it's a skill that a lot of people, it's really worth investing the time to feel confident doing them. So you're not reading things. A lot of my students like to read. They read their notes, they hold things up. It's a safety mechanism. It's to make them feel safer. But you want to be confident speaking, not reading. So that's really why I wanted to start that course.
And it's also not the same, speaking in a conversation in a bar with somebody, than presenting your ideas in front of a group that may or may not be judging you. And we'll talk about the audience and reading them a little bit later on. So guys, first things first. Before we go any further, you got to go over and follow Anna. It's Anna 2Ns English, @ Anna 2Ns English on Instagram. Follow her podcast. And then I also want to know about this Chatterbox because I love the name. What a great name for a podcast. Tell us about Chatterbox.
Chatterbox is a podcast which I co-host on Coolip's English, which is another fantastic place if you want to practice your listening skills. And this is a podcast where I talk about loads of different current affairs, things that are going on in the news. And I have a conversation with my co-host, Andrew. And it's just a great way for you to hear two native speakers talking about something that you might hear in a coffee shop or on the sofa with your friends. So that's Chatterbox. So make sure you check it out.
It's conversational English, which I think is so important, and it's you guys shooting the breeze, so to speak. Just talking about nothing and everything, solving the world's problems at the same time.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah.
Well, but I love that. I love that word that you British, listen to me, you British people use, banter. I love that word. That kind of like talking, but arguing, but you're not really arguing. You're just kind of,
Wow. Banter is a crazy word. It's a really difficult concept to try and explain, but you can have work banter, but banter is like taking the mick out of each other, but in a playful way. But it's a very British thing. Yeah. Banter.
I think of football teams. Like, I don't hate all the Atletico fans. In fact, there's no one I would rather watch a game with because of that banter.
Right.
That joking kind of picking on each other, as we would say.
Exactly.
And what we're doing right now, we're involved in a bit of banter, but we've got something to talk about. We came here to talk about presentations. What are the different kinds of presentations, Anna?
Well, there's some main types that maybe you're familiar with these ones, but there's kind of a set of different types. For example, information, telling people about something, pretty straightforward. And this is going to be probably one of the most common types of presentations. And just to say as well, a presentation is something, it's different to a speech. Okay, the definitions are slightly different. Sometimes it's a little bit blurred, but a presentation would normally be where you're speaking with some kind of visual aid, maybe a PowerPoint or something like that. So information, telling people about something, a point.
Conveying information, sure. New rules at work. Guys, we got to go over some new guidelines, human resources, right?
Telling somebody about your area of expertise. Okay, so this is what I know about this topic. Also, being persuasive, trying to either get people to do something you want them to do, or maybe even selling them something. Okay, so it can be something really direct, like we want you to buy this, or it could be more subtle, like we want you to come around to this way of doing things. Inspirational, trying to get people on your side, trying to motivate people. Imagine if you have a big organization.
Religious.
Yeah. Or you've got an organization who's going through a massive change. You've got to get people on board with that and get them excited about where the company's going. Educational, how to do something. These are some steps. And maybe entertaining, sort of being funny and trying to make people laugh, maybe would be in some context a presentation that people will do. So Those are, I mean, there's lots of different types, but I would say that those are probably some of the more common ones that people would come into contact with.
So you're presenting information, and the thing is, in what field? What is your objective? Which I think we're going to look at that in a moment. I think determining that can help you find the right direction to take your presentation in, because there are so many options. What's funny? Speaking of weddings, I was asked to wed 2 friends. And I've been on stage in front of thousands of people. I don't suffer from stage fright, thankfully. Do you know I bit my nails? I've never bitten my nails.
Wow.
I was so nervous because I was like, this is like the memorable day. I want to be funny, but I don't want to be that funny guy. I want to be, charming, but I don't want to take any protagonism away from them. So that's an important thing too. Who's your audience? What exactly is the reason? So determining what kind of presentation you have to do and your purpose is a good first step, right?
Absolutely. You really need to think about, what am I trying to get out of this presentation? What's my end goal? And just having that in mind is going to help you think about help you to start to think about what you want to tell people, because ultimately that's what we're doing. We're getting a message across to people. But I can't imagine if somebody asked me to do that, Alberto, I don't know what I would do, but I wouldn't have any nails left.
I think I was drunk when I said yes, but I didn't realize the implications, which usually happens when someone's like, we usually get roped into these things. Nobody says willingly, I want to do a presentation. It's like, usually your boss is like, tomorrow you're going to speak in front of a group. And you're like, really?
I think everybody gets, I've actually saw a statistic about this, public speaking, and it said that something like 90% of people are anxious or have anxiety about doing presentations. So I think it's something that is just completely normal. I can't imagine there's many people, like you said, that put their hand up like, oh yeah, let's go. I'll do a presentation tomorrow.
Do it. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Me. So I think it's something that's really normal to be nervous about as well. And that's important to say. Like, if you're nervous, that's normal. You have to learn to work with the nerves, and there are things that you can do, and we'll talk about that.
Jerry Seinfeld, one of my favorite comedians, he said this. Now, I'm not sure about the statistic, but the joke is brilliant. He said that more people on this earth have a phobia of public speaking than death. So he said at a funeral, most people would rather be in the coffin than behind the podium. That's pretty crazy when you think about that.
It's pretty crazy. That's pretty crazy. But it's true. I think it must be one of the things that people have, maybe one of the most commonly shared fears that people have, are just about being in front of people and saying what you have to say.
And it can be crippling, like you said. Those nerves can be crippling, where you're stuttering, you're spilling your water. I mean, it can get really violently crippling. And something I'd like to hear your opinion about this, but I remember in acting, I studied acting, and I remember going into an audition. Our teacher, one of the dean, and one of the people I look up to the most, and she said, there's going to be nerves no matter what. You're going to be nervous. That means you care. That's first. She said, but if you can determine the difference between I'm nervous because I'm not prepared, and I'm nervous because I want to kick butt, then you can really, really move forward and, come to grips with it, as we say. What's your feeling on that kind of philosophy?
I love the distinction between the two types of nerves, because we all know that feeling when we haven't done the preparation and we're like, oh no. And we all know it. We've all been there. Right? I'm just going to get through this. And normally what happens in that situation, I've seen, people tend to talk really fast, because you're like, I want to get to the end point as quickly as possible to try and just get it over with, which is really not a good strategy. We don't want to speak too fast. That's a key thing. But I think that, being nervous because you care and because you've prepared and you want this, I think actually at the beginning it feels really terrifying. But then I think once you get into it and you get into the flow, those nerves kind of start to fade away and you kind of come into your own. So,
as we say in American English, you get in the zone, you get focused.
Get in the zone and you get the flow. I always say this with my students, when they get into the flow and they're just like as you said, in the zone.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Great. Excellent. All right. So, I mean, okay, it sounds really good. It sounds really easy, but I imagine there are a lot of misconceptions. What are some of the misconceptions? I mean, I know we're going to tell you guys a little bit about her course in the second part of today's show, but what are some of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to presentations and presenting information in front of a group?
So I'll start with, I think the biggest misconception is the idea that presentation skills are only useful for presentations. Okay, the skills that you learn or the way of delivering information is only useful when you're standing up in front of people or you're on a Zoom meeting with people. It's not true at all. In fact, I heard a quote from a TED Talk recently which said, all speaking is public speaking, which I think is a really nice way to put it.
Interesting. Sure.
So
sure.
Give these types of skills of presenting an argument or telling people what you want to say. You can use those types of skills in meetings, in conversations, maybe a little bit more formal, but they're still applicable in many different areas. Like you said, a speech at a wedding, for example, it doesn't have to be just in a professional context. It helps you put together what you want to say.
Who doesn't need people skills and communication skills is essentially what you're saying.
Exactly.
These are skills that are useful in any field.
Transferable in any industry, in any area, in any job. You know, even if you're, I don't know, you're a salesperson, you work online, but you still want to talk to clients, maybe over the phone. Even over the phone, these things are useful. So that's probably the biggest misconception, I would say. Another one is that at a certain level, so let's say mainly a lot of people I work with are intermediate level, higher intermediate. At a certain level, once you get past that stage, it's less about what you say. It's still important, of course, your message, but actually the way that you can prove it is how you say things. So, for example, universal things like your body language and the way that you present yourself and your posture, but also specifically on things about the language, intonation, the rising and falling of your voice.
Sure, the tone and the feeling that that energy that you're giving the audience.
Exactly. So I work a lot with people on that. Like, how can you try and, I guess, almost bring your personality out as well? Because when people are really nervous, they tend to be very robotic. So they will kind of close up like this and they're like, they speak like this and they're very nervous. But when they start to relax, you see more of their personality. It's in everything. Their body language is much more positive and open. And so I really think that is almost more important when you're at that kind of level, how you say things rather than what you're necessarily
not the actual
saying.
words.
Exactly.
Right. I tell my students often with going along those lines, I say, I want to see why your friends like you. I want to see why you're that likable person that, walks into the bar and everybody's like, hey, that should come out. You should, because people they're going to want to stay there. They're going to want to ask you questions. They're going to want to stay after and chat with you and, maybe even help you. Who knows?
Right. And
collaborate.
Exactly. And as I said before about presentations being really important, there's an expression we have in English, which is you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So imagine you've got an interview or you're presenting to a new client, like that's your shot. And you want to make sure that they get a really good picture of you, that they see you for who you are, you build rapport with them. So, being able to be yourself while you're giving presentations, I think is super, super important.
Sure. And I think a lot of this stuff, correct me if I'm wrong, applies to a job interview too. You want to shine.
Absolutely.
You want your best quality. Now, why do I want to work with this guy? Well, why did people want to hang out with this person? So we shouldn't try and hide that. And our inhibitions will make us do that naturally. But we want our true selves to really come out to that's what makes us unique.
And one of the things as well, I said there about when people are very nervous, they tend to be very robotic. And another thing people do when they're nervous is they don't smile. So they look like they're having the worst time of their lives when they're giving, they're almost, they look like they've been through some kind of trauma or they're suffering.
A veins is popping out of their forehead.
They look like they're having the worst time. So actually one of the things I say to people is you just got to try and loosen up and smile a little bit, because when you really enjoy it. Just smile, because sometimes people look like they're having the worst time because they're really nervous.
Well, how are you going to convince people if you're not convinced? Think about that. What kind of if you're not convincing in the way you present it, and you're not excited and enthusiastic about it, why should I be?
Good point. Absolutely.
So we want to see enthusiasm. Now, is there, like everything, I imagine there's a limit. Like, you don't want to come in there like Bozo the Clown, like, hey, everybody. I don't know. I guess, is there a time and place? Do you measure the audience? What would be your advice for how much is too much as far as charisma, so to speak?
Yeah, I guess it's that line between you've got to think about who's my audience, the people in front of me, and also making sure that you're being genuine. So I guess in a professional context, that's the context I'm most used to. You've really got to think about a couple of things. Like, are they people you already know? Like, do you already have a relationship with them? That's definitely really important, because then you can be a little bit more relaxed. You can, go with the flow a little bit more. Are these people that you don't know and you need to really think about how you're coming across? How am I presenting yourself, for example? Also, another really good thing to think about with your audience is, are they native speakers or non-native speakers of English or any language? That's also an important thing just to take into account. Why? Because if you've got native speakers, then, if you use different things like expressions, or maybe you want to use some kind of more complicated vocabulary, then the likelihood is they're going to be able to understand you. Well, they should understand you. But maybe if you've got a non-native audience, you might need to think about, how could I simplify my vocabulary? Maybe not everybody might be
say, we were chilling at my crib. We were relaxing at my house. Because people are like, wait, that sounds like something out of MTV.
Yeah. So definitely think about that when you're giving your English presentation. Like, who am I talking to? Right. But yeah, I mean, it depends. If you're a clown, for example, and you're going to give a presentation about what you could do, then I guess you would want to be over the top. But I suppose in a business context, maybe not.
So again, I think it goes back to what you said before. Know what your objective is, know your audience, and know your material. What you said. If you're reading, nobody wants to be read to. And maybe my daughter. That's it. And even her, if I start making it monotone, she's going to be like, Daddy, do the voices, do the little pig. So yeah, we want to be entertained. Humans want to be entertained as well as informed.
Yeah. And when you read, your voice dies. Okay. Well, I mean, when people are reading in another language, for example, if I were to pick up a page now and start reading in Spanish, my voice, my intonation would just die, because I'm looking at the words and I'm focusing so much on saying the words that you lose that naturalness that comes with your voice. Right. So, your voice just dies. All that life that you have in your voice, that personality, that character, it just goes.
Right.
So notes are fine. Prompts, we're all good with prompts. I totally get that maybe it's hard to, memorize everything that you want to say. Prompts are good, but we don't want to be reading. We want to try and move away from that reading and memorizing, because it makes you sound less natural when you speak.
Right. And in the end, it's called a presentation because we are presenting the information. We're not reading. If not, they would call it a reading. And there are things called readings of plays, of books, but that's a different monster, and that's another episode of FYI. What do we do, Anna? And now I want to tell you guys today, because Anna's on the show, I decided to make the bonus part. Now, normally the bonus part is exclusively for my patrons, my students over on Patreon. But I've decided, since this stuff is really useful, I think everybody deserves to know this. And I want everybody to hear what she's going to tell us in the bonus part, because she's going to share a lot of stuff with us. She's going to tell us about her course and her experience. We're going to talk about do's and don'ts. And I don't know if we said this, but Anna is a language learner as well. So she's going to give us some of her tips, not only as someone who's an expert on presentations, but also someone who is in the process of learning a language now. So that's all going to be in the bonus part. But really quickly, I just want to send a shout out to all my patrons. As I said, you guys are the producers. This show would not be possible without you. If you guys are interested in becoming patrons, it's patreon.com/Alberto Alonso. Take a look around. You can get bonus audio, PDFs with the vocabulary, review classes with me, monthly master classes, and obviously 24/7 access to me. Now, I'm not going to answer at 4 a.m. Well, you never know. I could be up with some insomnia, and I may answer you at 4 a.m. So a shout out to all of you guys, especially my super duper students, Mara, Javier, Francisco, Tony, Roberto, David, Jose Maria, Mila, Alex, Patricio, Edgar, and Loles. And don't forget about my interstellar students, Paco, Diego, Carmen, and Diana. If you guys want more information, go to patreon.com/Alberto Alonso. But today, it's free. So it'll be coming out right after. First, we'll release this first part, but in the bonus part, I'm really excited to hear your learning tips as somebody who's learning a language myself. And before we get going, though, what I wanted to look at is your podcast, because you told us a little bit about it, but what kind of things can we learn on your podcast? Because you deal with presentation stuff, business stuff, but also phrasal verbs. Tell us some of the topics that you've dealt with on Anna with 2 N's. And guys, remember, you can download this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.
So all of the topics that I talk about on Anna with 2 N's is all about how to make you feel more comfortable or confident speaking English at work, but not only speaking, understanding things as well. Because there's a lot of people, one of the biggest things that people find difficult with business English is they say to me, Anna, I go into a meeting and I don't understand anything that the other person is saying. I don't understand anything. So in each of my episodes, either I'll talk about some phrasal verbs, some business phrasal verbs, what they mean, and I'll put them in context for you. I'll give you some examples. I also really like to take grammar points and show you how we use them in a business context. For example, the second conditional in negotiations, or the third conditional when we're talking about reflections and lessons learned. And I also like to do episodes where I give you pieces of vocabulary. For example, how to apologize in a professional way, or how to talk about project progress. So it's all about making you more confident with your business English.
Great. And I think it's very useful stuff. As I said, most of you are following the podcast and following her on Instagram. And if you're not, that's your last warning. Get over there right now and follow her and learn all this useful stuff that could come in handy, who knows, in your next job interview, your next presentation, or your next wedding. Well, I'm excited about the bonus part, Anna, so let's take a quick break, and then we'll be back with the bonus part of today's FYI.